What's up out there? You are here with us at Switch4Good.
Hi,
Alexandra. I felt like that was going to happen. Oh, man. Well, it's the new decade, and I recognize that we are probably going to air this at the beginning of February, but we're all still kind of kvetching on that it is 2020, and it's just amazing, and it's going to be the year of dairy-free.
Yay.
Yes.
Especially with you and all your great works getting the Olympics dairy free.
It's going to happen.
Dotsie.
Yeah, it's a big year for Switch4Good. So we're going to curb our chit-chat because we have a mind-blowingly amazing guest in the studio with us. And I'm just going to go ahead and reveal it. It's Jason Wrobel. And I had the pleasure of meeting Jason a very long time ago, about 60 days ago, up in Oregon at the Remedy Retreat. Which, for those of you who don't know, we should definitely do a Remedy plug. It is a weekend of education and inspiration for people who are kind of struggling to take control of their health. And if you want to look it up, it's remedyfood.org. And you have been with the Remedy Retreat, I think, since the beginning. This was my first year. But
You all spoke. You spoke.
We both spoke. That's correct. Right. Like on different subjects. But yes, we did, which all it ended up boiling down to what you should put on your plate, right? That's what we're there for. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about Jason, and then we're just going to riff and have a great time. Okay, so this is a man of many talents, which I learned both at Remedy and on the hike that Jason and I took at Remedy. That was, maybe the highlight of the weekend for me. I really enjoyed getting to know you. But you ooze wellness and vitality, and you have an incredible energy, an incredible charm, an incredible wit, and you're a full-blown comedian, in my opinion, and I think many, many others. You began your career, which is a little crazy, as a marketing student who then dove into Culinary School, which obviously launched your reputation as this incredible chef that you are. And you landed what was the first ever plant-based cooking show on primetime television. Wow. But you were way ahead of your time. And it got canceled after the first season. And I remember you telling me on the hike that the producer said to you, "You are extraordinary, but all people want is burgers and brats." And you said, I can veganize those. We can do burgers and brats, and it doesn't have to include animals. But you are ahead of your time. You were ahead of your time. And I have all the confidence in the world that you will be back on primetime TV in no time, because it's 2020. So we are going to dive into you, your history, your story. And then, of course, we must talk about food. You also have a book we must tell people, because I'm positive that they're going to want to buy it after listening to you. And it's called Eternity. And it's pretty cool because it has all these different chapters that are like how to have better sleep and how to have better energy and how to have better sex. So we're going to have to talk about that too. So welcome.
And the podcast. He has a podcast.
Yes,
too.
I can't do it all in
yeah,
the intro
that's
because
true.
you're so talented.
Stuff it all in.
And we're going to get into that for sure, because it's a unique podcast. I think it's something that a subject that's in a space that not a lot of people are doing. So we'll dive into that. But you grew up in Detroit.
Indeed. Motor City.
Yes, you did. And your mother still lives there.
She does. Most of my family still lives there.
Yeah. Okay. And you're very close with your mom. In fact, she came to visit recently.
For the holidays, yeah.
Yes. And spoiler alert, which we may get into later, Jason is creating our first ever Switch4Good meal plans that are coming. We'll probably release them end of January, 1st of February, right?
Oh, so excited about this. It's been me being a mad scientist in the lab, getting to create stuff from scratch. And, anytime I get to create new recipes or meal plans, it's always thinking, first of all, how can I honor the vision that we're co-creating, right? Because you gave me some pretty cool ideas, like, okay, how can I riff on that? But also making sure that as an artist, I'm always trying to challenge myself to do stuff I haven't done before. So it's been cool to do that, right? As you try and satisfy, like, what can people actually make in the kitchen? Don't make it too difficult, make it approachable, but also satisfy my creative inklings as an artist to do new things and things I haven't done before.
Yeah.
So are the meal plans for folks who want to become vegan and don't know what to eat, or to lose weight, or to lower their blood pressure? What?
Well, we're definitely focusing on high protein and also having dairy substitutes. So a lot of the sauces or certain components that I have in the recipes are things that people can go, oh, I can use this non-dairy milk, or I can use this egg substitute, or use this alternative cheese, and do something that obviously is lower inflammation, still has the protein, the vitamins, and the minerals. So to me, I'm always thinking about, the functional benefits of the nutrition of the recipe, but still having the same taste, texture, flavor that people are used to. Because for most people, taste is the bottom line. You can have the healthiest dish in the world, but if it doesn't taste good, nobody wants to eat it. So flavor's always got to be at the top of the list.
Yeah. And your mom was helping you create some of these recipes and taste test them, right?
Totally.
You guys were making them together.
Totally.
And you guys had a good time. Tell me how your mom helped to shape who you are as a person, because you have such affinity for her.
My mom first of all, my mom has always been the type of parent who has encouraged my insane, crazy exploits throughout life, no matter what I wanted to do. Because originally, the original plan, okay, if we're talking about 3-year-old Jason, was to be a paleontologist. I wanted to travel the world.
How did you even know that word? Because I learned that word in 2nd grade, and I remember because I had to learn how to spell it.
I learned it on Friends, because like Ross, that's what he was, right? That's
exactly.
The only thing I know about it. Go ahead.
Paleontology.
So
it's like, what 3-year-old from Detroit wants to be a paleontologist? I want to go around the world and dig up artifacts and animal bones. So somehow we lost the plot on paleontology, but still have the affinity for dinosaurs. But my mom has always just been a massive support mechanism of whatever you feel your path is. Even if it's many different paths throughout the course of your life, go forward. Trust your passion, follow your heart, do what you feel called to do, even if nobody understands. And certainly, if I go to when I was first exploring being plant-based in the mid-90s in Detroit, where people thought I was in a cult. Because in the mid-90s in Detroit, if you're not eating burgers and brats and beer and cheese and eggs in the Midwest, people think you're insane. So I remember when I was first starting my transition, one of the biggest ways that she supported me was, first of all, accepting the fact that I wanted to eat more plant-based when I first went vegetarian and then vegan, but then helping me to veganize a lot of the classic family recipes we grew up with. Because my mom's an amazing cook. And I grew up with a family of amazing cooks, my grandma, my aunts, my mom. So I was always helping out in the kitchen when I was little. I loved being in the kitchen, helping them chop things, helping them blend things, helping them spend hours making this food from scratch. So my culinary upbringing on my mom's side was very much Eastern European, Polish cooking. And then my dad's side was Puerto Rican and Spanish food. So I grew up just loving food and also having this association between making a meal together from scratch, and then the bonding and the nourishing experience of coming together as a family and sharing a meal. And to this day, I know we live in this crazy, fast-paced culture, but to me, there's something so sacred about getting together with friends or family or a loved one or your spouse and making a meal from scratch together is such a beautiful bonding experience. So not only nourishing ourselves physically, mentally with food, but the connection that's fostered through making a meal. I just love that. And I think we need to do more of it in our society.
Yeah, and feel the food and smell the food and be with the food and not just unwrap it in a package and then eat it process-wise, right?
Totally. And I think that's part of our self-care too, is, there's a meditative aspect to taking time to make a meal from scratch. It really is. It's a beautiful meditation. So that's something my mom taught me is just the sacredness of making a meal together and doing it from scratch and treating it as a meditation. So that's how I try to treat it now as a chef.
And it's love, like your hat says. Period. Love, period.
It's a sentence. It's a command. It's a statement. It's all of the things. It's not a question mark, people. It's a period.
No doubt. And it's how you can express love.
Totally.
I mean, I'm like a really lame cook, but I actually cooked dinner for my husband last night, and it was the 10-minute. It wasn't all from scratch, but sort of. And it feels like I'm just sharing love with him. Like I'm giving him love, and yeah. So his feedback has to be that it's the most amazing thing he's ever tasted, or there's no more love, period.
No pressure at all.
So what in the mid-90s did this young man from Detroit, what inspired him to become vegetarian and then vegan? despite all the pressure that you were in a cult.
You from Mars? What is Vegan? What is this thing? It's vegan, guys. It was, well, first of all, let's backtrack to when I was little and wanting to be a paleontologist. When I was born, I was lactose intolerant. So I've been lactose intolerant my entire life. So as a young child, I was actually vegan by default because my mom wasn't feeding me meat or dairy products when I was really, really little. So the first few years of my life, we didn't have a name for it, and she wasn't specifically raising me vegetarian. It was just by virtue of not being able to eat dairy products and her not serving me meat as a young child. So fast forward 15 years, I'm 18 years old. It's 1995, and my grandfather is passing away from cancer. It's his second bout with cancer. He conquered it in the 60s. It came back really aggressively in the 90s. And I remember having this really fascinating emotional experience watching him die from cancer. And it was this thought that here's the patriarch of our family. He's the strongest figure that I know. You could go to my grandpa Walter for anything. You needed a lug nut for a 72 Pinto. He had it in the basement. You needed to flip a garage door in an hour. He could rip the garage door off and rehang it. My grandpa could he was one of those like, we'll get it done. Wow. No matter what it is, we'll just get it done. He had that kind of personality, and I think fostered that attitude in our family of not only hardworking, but, hey, we don't know how to do this thing, but we're damn sure going to figure it out. So something about seeing this strong patriarch of our family wither away and die had a profound psychological effect on me. I didn't know it at the time at age 18, but I think part of it was some of the nonchalance of my family's reaction to disease. Well, that's just what happens. You know, you get old, you get your 70s, your 80s, you get a disease, you die. You get heart disease, you get cancer, you get diabetes. And I thought, the nonchalance in which this is being treated is very strange to me. Like, what do you mean this is what happens? And what originally became this quest, and at the time the internet had just come out in 95, like I'm on my dial-up when waiting like, oh my God. Researching.
No, you weren't even, oh my God. You were thinking, wow, this is great.
No,
you're
right.
Even
You're right.
know how
you're right. Thank you. Alexandra, you're completely right. I was like,
for 2
this
hours.
is the best thing ever. Holistic solutions for cancer. I'll wait.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to go to the library while this loads and use the Dewey Decimal System while this loads. I was multitasking. I was at the library waiting for the modem to kick in. But I originally started as this idea of, okay, my grandfather, as loving and amazing of a man as he was, he didn't really take care of himself. You know, he chewed tobacco, he drank, he didn't really eat well. And I thought, okay, I don't want to end up this way. I don't want to be in my 70s battling cancer. It just, something about that didn't make sense to me. And so at that time, there was this interesting sort of confluence of things, not only the internet, my grandfather passing away, but that was really when the information in the media started coming out about mad cow disease and the human variant, which is CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is interesting. People are having this link between dementia and brain diseases from eating beef. So the idea was that if you ate beef that came from a mad cow, it could mutate into the variant, which was Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, which there was some interesting research coming out at that time of misdiagnosed Alzheimer, which was actually CJD. And so my young 18-year-old brain is like, what is going on right now? So I just started to voraciously research holistic health. And that led me to more research about the inflammatory, parts of eating animal products. And at that time, before the podcast started, we were talking about Dr. Neil Bernard. He was one of the first people that I started researching. And I remember his stuff coming about heterocyclic amines and what happens when you cook meat. And my brain is spinning. My young teenage brain is like, what is all of this? And eventually I kind of calmed down because there was so much research at that time, nothing like we have now, but enough to make my head spin, to where I thought, you know what I'm going to do? Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to eliminate one animal product at a time and just see how I feel. So gradually I started to take away beef was the first thing, then pork, then chicken, then eggs, and then fish. And mind you, this was over a 3-year period where I was not just eating a standard American diet in Detroit. I was a junk fooditarian. I would go to Wendys, and you couldn't even get a triple on the menu. It was a secret menu, but you could get a triple patty at Wendys. I was the guy going to Wendys and getting a triple.
They were square. I don't know why I liked them so much that they were square, but I did.
And also, spoiler alert, my very first, and this is tangential, but my very first culinary job was actually the grill guy at Wendys. The vegan chef used to be the grill guy.
We are
McDonald's,
kindred spirits. I used to work at McDonald's.
You did?
Yes, in my early 20s.
That's crazy.
Okay.
Wow.
Do you have any secrets? Because I know you stopped eating the French fries because
I watched them pull out the stainless steel drawer with the vat of white animal fat, scoop it with an ice scooper, and plop it into the fryer. And I was like, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen with my own eyes.
Wow.
And so I would still eat the rest of the food, but the fries just made me vomit in my mouth, even thinking about them. So anyway.
So what about
fast
you?
Food junkies,
do you want to hear a little?
Yes,
Are we going to get in trouble? No, we're not going to. Okay,
no,
Wendys. Okay.
It's real.
What freaked
You
me out
there.
and the reason that I stopped working was not looking at what was in the Frosty mix. We're not going to talk about those unpronounceable ingredients.
Okay.
It was when we would get slammed at Wendys. Eventually, certain burgers that were on the grill got pushed to the back because there's a ton of orders coming and you can't manage all of the patties. I'm the grill guy. I'm trying to multitask. So the burgers that got pushed to the back of the grill that eventually became sort of looking like George Hamilton's skin, and kind of leathery, we didn't throw those out. We would crumble up those leathery pieces of old beef and put them into the chili. So the chili meat at that time at Wendys in Detroit was from old, congealed, leather-like pieces of beef that got left on the grill too long. That was the chili meat. I was like, I'm not okay with this. I'm really not okay with this. So that stint only lasted a few months. And truth be told, I got into Wendys because there was a girl I had a crush on who also worked at that Wendys. It worked. We ended up getting together. So mission accomplished. But my original stint at Wendys did not last, thankfully.
And you were gone from Wendys by the time you gave up the meat, the beef?
No, this was pre-research. So my grandpa was still alive. This was the summer of 1995. I just graduated high school. And he didn't pass away until the fall of 95. So this was pre-grandpa passing away and pre-me going on my research bender.
Yeah. Okay.
But that research bender, resulted in me, of course, first of all, exploring plant-based living from a health perspective. But as I was doing the research, of course, all of this interesting information started coming out, just pieces of it about the environmental implications. And then at that time, I was in college, and I was taking a philosophy of ethics class. And I remember we were talking about different ethical theories from Immanuel Kant and all these great philosophers, and Descartes and Nietzsche. And one day in class, I was debating with my professor and other students about our ethical stand. Like, what are our personal ethics? Can we define those? And I remember saying, well, I'm an animal lover, and I advocate for, animal rights. And they're like, what did you have for lunch today? I was like, I had a chicken sandwich. Mm-hmm. They're like, but you call yourself an animal lover. Mm-hmm. And they weren't doing it in a way that was accusing or demeaning. It was like
an exploration.
There's a gap potentially in your ethics if you're calling yourself an animal lover, but you are protecting and rescuing and volunteering at an animal shelter that protects dogs and cats, but then you're eating the flesh of these other animals. So what do you mean when you say you're an animal lover? Yeah. A domesticated animal lover?
There you go.
So that ethics class also kind of brought in that part of it too, which was in addition to the environmental and the health reasons. So by the time I chose to be vegan in May of 98, it was for all of the reasons.
Right.
All of the reasons.
Did you become a junk food vegan because you were eating junk food before, or were you able to make the transition in a healthful way?
Honestly, it was a little bit of a mixture of both because there were two things at play. There was me being 20 years old and being like, I want my burgers and my, soy patties and and there weren't that many options in Detroit in 1998, mind you. I mean, there was no Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger. There was none of those stuff. So by default, I would think I was skewing more on the health side of things simply because there weren't as many convenience options at that time. I mean, the convenience option at that time, it was like We had Eden soy milk. We're getting old school for a second. We had Tofutti.
Tofutti cuties.
Whoa,
You had
Tofutti
those.
cuties.
Yeah.
We had like soya Kos cheese shreds, which tasted more like the things you would shellac or caulk your bathroom with. It wasn't really cheese. It was like, it's not melting, and it's 400 degrees for an hour. Why isn't this melting? My God, we've come so far. So by default, I was making more meals from scratch simply because there weren't a ton of convenience options out there at that time.
And then did that develop your interest in being a chef? Or was it your stint at Wendys that actually inspired you?
Because you went into marketing. I mean, that's what was next, right?
Yeah,
like that, and then you shifted and you went to culinary school.
Well, like so I was a student filmmaker in high school. I actually ended up getting a film scholarship to go to Columbia in Chicago. So I got a film scholarship to be a filmmaker. So before the marketing, I was doing film. But through some stints and stuff like that, I started working the ad business, and they're like, oh, well, you're really good. You know, you should get in the ad business. So being a student filmmaker parlayed into getting into the advertising industry. So I worked in the advertising industry for over 5 years and was working for some of the big ad agencies like J. Walter Thompson and things like that. But my heart wasn't in it. There was no part of me that was like, I'm doing good in the world by shooting commercials or being a copywriter or promoting, you know, the new Ford Explorer. My heart wasn't in it. So I actually was doing music this whole time, by the way. I've sang in bands for 20 years. So when I was in Detroit and Chicago, I was singing in punk bands and hardcore bands and a lot of screamy, young, angry things.
I see him in a band with Tal Ronan and Dr. Neil Barnard.
We
the
gotta set
vegans.
this up.
Like the vegan vigilantes. Like, welcome to Vegan Vigilantes.
You could all quit what you're doing now, and this
I think
happen.
you can do a fundraising show for animals.
Yeah.
At
Actually,
least.
you know what?
Get
At like the next HSUS Awards, we should put the band back together, guys. We're putting one night only. Moby, because Moby does that. So Moby actually, okay, Moby, fine. You actually do this for a living.
Come. You've been begging us, so
we'll let you in the band. You can play congas, Moby. So music was happening, filmmaking was happening, advertising was happening, but for me, I had always wanted to somehow use my talents and my creativity to help animals and to make a difference, and I didn't feel like I was doing any of that. So the culinary thing came in actually when I moved out to California in 2005. I left Detroit, quit my job in advertising. I was like, I'm moving out to California. I'm going to do the music thing, which I was doing but wasn't making any money at it. And it was like, well, what can I do that I'm talented at and enjoy that I can actually make a living at? Because music was not paying the bills. When I came to LA in my late 20s, I was like, I'm a starving artist. This is, So Culinary School came up because like I like making food. I'm pretty good at it. But what if I went to school and became great at it? So the Culinary School actually came because I wasn't making any money as a musician, to be honest with you. It was like, I need something else to do. And it's interesting because like then the food kind of took over my life in a really beautiful way, but not immediately. Because in 2005, being a vegan chef was like, what are you doing? Again, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
A vegan chef? Are you out of your mind?
you better go back to music.
Yeah, it's like there's more job security in music, bud. There's way more job security in music. So it took a while to get people understanding what I was trying to do. Because in 2005, being a vegan, there was MySpace. There was no Facebook yet. There was no YouTube. So it took a while to get a momentum, and actually social media was a way that I actually started to build momentum in my career and get the word out about what I was doing.
So what did you do first? I know that you worked in restaurants.
I did.
You said that was not necessarily for you, couldn't be as creative as you wanted to be.
Yes.
So what did you do to make money? You go to culinary school and you're like, okay, let's do this. What's your first job?
Yeah, my first job was working I went back to Detroit. So I went to the Living Light Culinary Institute, which is about 3 hours north of San Francisco, graduated from their chef's training.
Is that a specifically vegetarian or vegan school?
It's fully plant-based, yeah. And at that time in 2005, there were only 3 options. There was a culinary school in London that was four. There was the Natural Gourmet Cookery School in New York, which is still around. There was some random chef school in London. And then there were 2 in the Bay Area. So it was like, all right, I'm not going to New York yet, although I did end up going to New York. Not going to London. So I'm just going to pick one in California because I was already here. So I ended up going and it was phenomenal. We had a whole nutrition component, a plant-based nutrition component with doctors Rick and Karen Dina at the time. So it was awesome because I not only got the culinary training, and learning knife skills and learning flavor balancing and textures and how to make things from scratch. But I got a great nutrition training in that program as well. So first thing I did, took a job.
That's rare in culinary school, right?
I feel like I got more nutrition training than doctors.
Yeah, that's incredible.
'Cause I'll
You
talk to-
definitely did. If you got more than 3 hours.
Yeah, I did.
You definitely, well, there.
Yeah,
there
I mean,
you
it was
go.
like I talked to doctor friends, and they're like, "You got more than we did." Yeah. So I went back to Detroit because there was a vegan cafe opening in Detroit. I was like, I got to be a part of this.
Was this Dr. Khan's vegan cafe?
No, this was many, many years before Dr.
Oh.
Khan's. This was a very short-lived venture in downtown Detroit called the Karmic Cafe. So I did that. That closed down. And my girlfriend at the time, who was also a chef, was living in New York. She's like, why don't you come out here? I was like, okay. I always wanted to live in New York. We wanted to be together. We weren't going to do the bi-coastal thing. So I move out to New York City. Again, I was singing in a 10-piece funk band at the time in Brooklyn. And I ended up working for Matthew Kenny, who I loved Matthew's work for many years. And at that
Now,
time...
is this just raw? Because I know him as a raw plant-based chef. Is it?
Yeah, so he had just left Pure Food and Wine at the time. And he was starting a new venture of blue-green juice bars and The Plant, which was kind of his commissary in Brooklyn. But I was his head chef at the Jivamukti Cafe at the Jivamukti Yoga Center. So we were doing raw and cooked. We were doing juices, we were doing some raw food, but we were also doing cooked vegan food as well. So that was an amazing apprenticeship because I had loved Matthew's work for years. You know, he was one of the pioneers of raw vegan food, gourmet raw vegan food. So to work with him in New York was like a dream come true. It was awesome. So I did the food thing. I worked in a cafe in Santa Cruz. I had moved back to California because my girlfriend at the time got a job at Google, and you don't really turn down a job at Google because the Googleians make it very enticing to work for them.
They do.
I won't get into
Was
that.
was she cooking for them? Because their food there is also very enticing.
She was. She
Yeah.
got a job offer to come and be
Nice.
one of the chefs at the Googleplex. So after New York, came back to California. So anyway, made my way back to LA. So I was just kind of kicking it in kitchens for about 3 years after culinary school. And I was like, this isn't for me. I don't like this. Right around 2009, I decided to start a catering business with a good friend of mine. And we were doing music festivals. We were doing green festivals. We did a lot of the vegan events like we did, it used to be called World Fest at Woodley Park. So we were doing a lot of catering events, a lot of public-facing vegan food events. And I just got so burnt out on catering. It was so much work for so little money. And interestingly enough, things kind of took an interesting turn in late 2009, 2010, when I started doing personal chefing for some celebrities in LA. And I was like, this is way better money. I like this. Thank you.
And for like 1 to 4 people instead of like
Thousands, hundreds.
right?
Exactly. So right around 2010 is when I started my YouTube channel and got more serious about social media and started doing celebrity personal chefing. And that's when things really just kind of took off for me. So things pivoted in 2010 and I just became more front facing with my media and my videos. And I don't know, things just kind of pivoted in a really beautiful way 10 years ago. And I'm really glad they did because I knew that catering and the restaurant side of things was not where I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. So we talked on our hike about kind of the next, well, there's many journeys that you've had in your life, but sort of your next journey out of this into, doing personal chef work and doing a lot of social media. And, you have a great YouTube channel and then you moved into having a cooking show on, right? It was Cooking Network because it was a subsidiary of Food Network. Do I have that right?
And it's Cooking Channel.
Cooking Channel.
So here's how the kind of pyramid works. So there's Scripps Networks who own like HGTV, DIY Network. They own the Food Network, Cooking Channel. So Food Network is obviously kind of like, if we talk about athletes, we'll talk about like the pros. So Food Network is like the pros. I'm a former basketball player, right? So I played basketball in high school and college. I love, it's my game, right?
Yeah.
I talk basketball all day long. So the Food Network is like the NBA. It's like the pros, right? You made it to the NBA. Cooking Channel is like you're like in the G League, and if you kick a whole lot of butt, you'll get bumped up to the NBA. So the Cooking Channel was where, and they still do to a degree, not as crazy as they used to be. They would experiment with really radical, off-the-wall creative ideas. Because at that time, when I signed my contract in 2012 for the pilot, before we got the first season, There was a show on called Bitchin' Kitchen with Nadia G, which was like this loudmouth crazy chef. Her name was Nadia G, and she had all these crazy characters, and it was this punk rock kitchen, and they'd break out into song of like, here's my chicken wings, like crazy wacky stuff. There was another guy called Baron Ambrosia who would walk around New York with a cape and a cane, and he was this flamboyant, crazy like culinary pimp.
Wow.
And then they brought me on because they're like, okay, your show's going to be skits. So my show ended up being comedy skits with animation and cooking segments. So Cooking Channel was this hotbed of creative ideas that if something got enough ratings and people liked it enough, they'd bump it up to Food Network. So that's when I say it was kind of like the Farm League or the G League of, if your crazy idea, your off-the-wall idea works, we'll bump you up to the big leagues.
Yeah.
So it was fun because they said, like, we want you to swing for the fences. We want you to bring, now, they didn't greenlight my wackiest idea. Because when they said swing for the fences, I brought them what was, I would say, Mr. Rogers meets Pee-wee's Playhouse meets Sesame Street with food. It was crazy. There were puppets, there were sets, there was explosions, there was madness. And they're like, that's going to be way too expensive to produce. We love you, but we need to do a lighter version of that. So I eventually brought it down because they didn't want to give us the budget to do that. But it ended up being skits and animation and cooking. It was like nothing that had been done before. It was
and
really
it was
cool.
called How to Live to 100?
It was called How to Live to 100. So it was definitely a longevity-based slant of when you eat these specific foods, they give you functional benefits to help with better sex, better sleep, better energy, more muscle, which that was kind of the concept that fed the cookbook later on. But they wanted like, hey, if people know when they eat certain things and use it in their recipes, it can help them with aspects of their life. We want to lead with that. So we never actually, in the pilot or the first season, ever used the word vegan. They were very adamant about us not calling it a vegan show.
And how did you feel about that?
I understood why they wanted to do that because when we were developing the show in 2011 and 2012 before it got greenlit, and to this day, the V word is still it's less now than it was, but back then they felt it was too contentious. Of like, when people hear the word vegan, they think of angry activists and people screaming at them for wearing fur and eating meat. And we don't want to use the word. I understood their reasoning why, because they wanted to let the food and the humor and the concept do the talking. Yeah. And I understood their point.
So you didn't even say plant-based. You just didn't have dairy and meat in any of your recipes.
Correct.
Interesting.
And I agreed with that because they wanted to make it more subversive. They're like, we've wanted to do a vegan show for years. But we didn't feel we had the right concept or the right host. We love you. We love the concept, so we're doing it. So they had told me stories of meeting with all kinds of people and ideas they shot down. It was fascinating, actually. But they didn't want to lead with veganism because they felt it was too contentious in our society to use that word. And to their points, I agreed with. And so I didn't fight them on that.
Right. So you have this show, and you're kind of on top of the world. I mean,
it was
incredible. It was your dream. You told me that was literally, it was fulfilling your dream.
Yeah.
And then it gets ripped out from underneath you. And then you spiral.
Yeah, it was a hard time. It was a hard time because, you have this dream for years. Like as a chef, my biggest dream was to have a vegan series on prime time. Like we were on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Like it was primo. It was like this. It was the craziest thing I could have possibly thought of as a chef, to have a vegan series on a network on a Sunday night. And so we did the pilot. We did one season. And then, the ratings weren't high enough. They're like, we're not renewing. And I was like, why? And they said, because, well, our people want burgers, brats, and beer. And you brought that up in the beginning. It's like, we can do beer and brats and burgers vegan. Guy, I did that on the show. What are you talking about? So it was just devastating to have a dream you've held for so many years and worked so long on this concept. And I just put all my heart into it. And I was just shattered, honestly, when it got canceled. And at that time, I had a cookbook deal that was on the table that got pulled because the show got canceled. My agent dropped me. My manager dropped me. I was going through a breakup with my girlfriend at the time, and it was the most depressed I'd ever been in my life.
And when you say it was the most depressed, was this the first time you got depressed, or had you struggled with that kind of thing before?
To be honest, I have struggled on and off in my life with depression, but this was the first time that I was, to be blunt, like suicidal. I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. And it was to the point of the kind of depression where I didn't want to get out of bed. I was thinking about killing myself every day. And it was something where, boy, I'm in my kitchen. This is like the summer of 2014. And I'm coming up with ways how I'm going to kill myself. I'm coming up with ways, like I'm planning out my suicide. And I remember like standing in my kitchen with my chef's knife, like I'm going to slit my wrists. I'm going to kill myself. Like, what a more poetic way than the chef to take his favorite knife and to kill himself with his favorite knife. It's poetic. It's how I want to go out. So I'm standing there like contemplating whether or not I can actually do this. And I still don't know what this was. I don't know what your particular belief systems are, but a voice other than my own said, "Do you really want to die?" And it was this very strange moment of like, what do you mean? Yeah, of course. Wait, no, I don't want to die. I just don't want to suffer like this anymore. And it was such a huge distinction for me of thinking how much I wanted to die. But it wasn't that I actually wanted to die. I just didn't want to suffer like that anymore. And so it was this massive turning point in my life of, first of all, turning my life around and figuring out how to get myself out of this spiral of deep depression. I ended up going to a holistic functional medicine doctor and seeing a psychotherapist. And they're like, yeah, you're clinically depressed. And here's why. Did a whole blood panel test. Tested my brain.
When they say clinically, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
It sounded like you were situationally depressed. This situation was very, very tough. So does clinically depressed mean that you actually, the chemicals in your body?
Correct.
So what came first?
So through the tests we did, through the blood panel test and the neurotransmitter test, my doctor, who is amazing, his name is Dr. Alan Green in Los Angeles, he said, well, it's no wonder that you're this way. If we look at your dopamine, your serotonin, your 5-HTP, your epinephrine, like all of your primary neurotransmitters are suboptimal. So like chemically, it's no wonder you want to kill yourself. All of the chemicals in your brain are just tanked. And so to me, it was one of these things where here I am on TV talking about health when that entire time I'm not working out, right? Because it's like, 14-hour days on set. Like we're shooting this thing. I'm exhausted. I'm not taking care of myself. So add in several years of not practicing what I'm preaching, not supplementing, not eating well, really just giving myself over to this career because that's what I thought it needed to do, is just grind myself into the ground. And I'm like, wow, I'm actually not taking good care of myself. So the clinical depression diagnosis was based on the brain chemistry and the fact that some of my nutrients, when we did the blood panel test, were just horrifyingly bad. So he's like, you gotta start eating differently. You gotta start supplementing. We gotta turn this around. We gotta get your brain back on track. So in addition
to... just ask again, yes, for the people who are now going, yeah, because he ate vegan, that's why. Was it because... When you say supplementing, what do you mean? Because we hope that we'd be able to get everything we need from a whole
you're
food,
eating junk food
plant-based.
vegan, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I'm on set and I'm shooting the show and going on promo tour and doing all these things, it was just grabbing whatever on the go, right? So I'm not taking my B complex vitamins. I'm not taking my EPA and my DHA. I'm not taking my vitamin D3 or my K2, like the critical supplements that I feel have been beneficial to me, right? Because to make a sweeping generalization, this is my opinion, that we can get all of our nutrients that we need from the food we eat is not taking into account the particular physical or chemical challenges that the individual may be facing. And I say this simply because for me to see all my brain chemicals being so low and me being deficient in specific nutrients that feed those neurochemicals, my doctor was like, you're not going to eat your way out of this. Like, we need to get you on a hardcore supplement regime to get your brain chemistry back online, and then you can pull back a little bit.
Yeah. Vegan or not, or that the soil is producing and giving you. Either. That's a whole nother issue with are you getting the nutrients that you need? We don't have the same soil that we had 100 years ago, whether you're eating animals or not animals.
Exactly. So it's interesting you say that, Alexandra, of like, oh, well, if he had just eaten meat, he wouldn't have gotten clinically depressed. It was that I wasn't taking care of myself, vegan or not. It was about me not practicing here I am on, it's so funny, I think about it. Here I'm on TV, eat this for longevity, eat this for health. And I'm just like, okay, we got a half-hour break. Okay, just shovel it in and just keep shooting. And it was me ignoring my own needs. It was me talking about self-care and not practicing self-care. It was me talking about proper nutrition and not getting proper nutrition. And it was, if I look back on it, it was the wake-up call I needed. It was so painful at that time to go through all of those things. But had I not, who knows what would have happened?
Yeah.
So it was the wake-up call that I needed to get the show canceled, to get my health back on track, to go see a doctor, to get tested, to start seeing a psychotherapist, to start daily meditation, to start taking care of my brain and my mind in a different way that I'd never done before.
You hit this in incredibly important pivotal moment, definitely, obviously. And I hit the same one 19 years before you, where it was like, I do not want to be here anymore. And then I realized I'd be cool if I stayed, but I didn't want to be in the world in that state any longer.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was. And from that, you never have any concept, or I didn't, what beauty and what inspiration for the world and what knowledge is going to be birthed out of that horror in that moment in your kitchen. And you have now taken everything that happened to you then and all of the knowledge that you had when you came out of that. So with the doctor and you started going down the road, and everything that you have learned since then, and are helping people to understand so many things. But one of them is how our gut and how the food that we put in our gut helps to discern our mental health.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're just on the brink of people even starting to have this conversation or understand even what that means, right? I don't know if we're more depressed than we've ever been, or if it's just that we used to not talk about it much, right? Like back in our parents. I don't know. But there are a really large percentage of the population. It's in the 80 percentile of people who say they have at one time or another had negative depressive thoughts, whether they're in a constant depression or right. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So give us some thoughts on what we're putting in our bodies and how that discerns how we behave, how we feel, how we treat other people.
I think I'm so glad you brought up the gut-brain connection and how this relates to how we're nourishing or not nourishing ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest things is that highly acidic inflammatory foods. Mm-hmm. There's interesting research. There's a cool book that came out about 2 years ago called The Inflamed Mind, and talks about this connection between highly acidic inflammatory foods, artificial foods, processed foods, animal foods, that it's not just about inflammation in the body, it's inflaming our brains. Like the whole thing is causing inflammation. So this idea that reducing inflammatory foods and reducing acidic foods in our diets can help with our brain chemistry and a healthy mind. That's the number one thing is so interesting to reduce just inflammatory foods in general.
Can you expand on inflammatory foods for our audience and acidic foods too?
Absolutely. So if you look at the pH spectrum of where kind of foods are on the pH level, you have acidic foods that are, say, below 7.2, 7.0, 7.2, and alkaline foods are above 7.2 on the pH scale. This idea that highly processed meats, dairy products, eggs, artificial foods, carbonated sodas, candies, things like this, sugar, are all very, very acidic foods. Now, it doesn't mean categorically that all acidic foods are bad. If we think about lemons, for instance, lemons are an acidic food, but when they mix with the amylase in our bodies, they convert to an alkaline food in the body. So it's not to say all acidic foods are bad, but processed animal foods are highly inflammatory, highly acidic foods. Now, we look at the correlation, say, between cancer research, and I go back to my grandpa, what he was experiencing. There's so many interesting studies that are looking at the environments in which cancer cells grow. And there's been some fascinating research. I think part of it is with the Gerson Institute, Max and Charlotte Gerson, showing that cancer cells have only been demonstrated to grow in acidic environments. That if you have a highly alkaline environment, the proliferation of cancer cells cannot do their thing the way they do in an acidic environment. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is thinking about not just our brain health, but our overall health is reducing acidic inflammatory foods. Again, not eliminating acidic foods, because we do need some, but if we look at the standard American diet, it's mostly inflammatory acidic foods. It's no wonder we have the health issues we have. The other thing, we go back to the gut-brain connection. There's been some cool stuff coming about the enteric nervous system, the ENS, which is this idea of when we have a gut feeling, or like I just have this intuition about it. They now know that the good, healthy microflora in our gut produces up to 95% of the serotonin in our body. So this idea that neurotransmitter of serotonin, and serotonin is the neurotransmitter of this feeling like all is well in our lives. It promotes calm. It promotes relaxation. It's like, you know what? Everything's going good in my life. Reduces anxiety. So making sure that we are reducing our dependence on antibiotics, which annihilate all of the good microflora in our guts. Reducing our dependence on, again, acidic foods, inflammatory foods, artificial foods. These are the things that kill the microflora in our guts. So for me, I'm a big proponent of probiotic foods. You know, coconut kefir, non-dairy yogurts, eating a lot of cultured vegetables or sauerkrauts and things like that.
Like fermented vegetables?
Fermented vegetables, okay. Yeah. I'm not as big of a fan of like probiotic pills. A lot of people will pop probiotic pills.
Actually, yeah, we had Dr. Angie Sadeghi on, and when we first had her on, she was a proponent of probiotics, but now she's learned in the last year, I think it's come out,
is just popping out
actually taking the pills isn't good for you. This is news probably to most of our audience because it's that new, but she doesn't recommend probiotics anymore. But prebiotics, like what you're talking about,
food,
which set up our gut, they're food that feed the good bacteria.
Exactly.
Instead of putting in the bacteria with a pill, you're actually just supporting the bacteria, the good bacteria that's there.
Giving them a buffet. Yeah, it's like, hey guys, we got a whole buffet lined up for you. Feast.
And people don't understand. Sorry to interrupt you. I have a dear friend who's a doctor who just had brain surgery, and they took some skin and fat from his abdomen to help the wound in his brain, and it got infected. And so he has been on the longest course of antibiotics. I mean, it's been like 12 weeks, and it was 3 different antibiotics. And besides the fact that he had brain surgery, and thank God it was a benign tumor, but he's been feeling he just got off the antibiotics, really blue the last couple of weeks. And I'm like, Eric, it's the antibiotics.
100%.
You know, you don't. And he's like, I don't know why you seem to be right about these kind of things, but I think you're right. You know, like, dude, you know this stuff. Like, you're so much smarter than I am. But that's, you know, people. It sucks because people don't know. They get an infection of anything and they take an antibiotic. Maybe it's a 2-week course, maybe it's a 4-week course, and then they're done. And then they're blue and miserable and sad, and they have no idea why. Yeah. And no one helps them to understand. And none of the doctors help them say that this might be the reason in your gut health. Anyway. I
think it's endemic of this philosophy of, and again, I don't want to set this up as a binary discussion or debate of, you know, Eastern versus Western medicine or holistic versus traditional, but I do think overall that there is an over-dependence on a quick fix aspect of our culture. Sure. And not just, you know, in terms of people trying to get rich quick, but people trying to come up with a solution to their health by taking a pill. And I say this because I was faced with a decision when I had my diagnosis of clinical depression and looking at the tests of the neurotransmitters and everything of, okay, I could take a Paxil or Zoloft or an antidepressant. I could do that. I could choose that. But I remember looking at the research from Harvard Health, of doing a long-term study of people who were on antidepressants, who in their study actually resulted in more suicidal thinking because of taking antidepressants. And I remember reading this when I was trying to
Because they got off of them, or because they were still on them?
Because they were still on them.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So it's this idea of, wait a second, so I'm taking this pill that's supposed to cure my depression, but it's increasing my thoughts of suicide? What is happening here? So I'm not trying to demonize Western medicine. That's not my intention right now. It's just that I would hope, and part of the work that I want to do is for people to investigate, maybe food could be a solution. Maybe self-care could be a solution. Maybe meditation and mindfulness and treating myself with more love, and therefore being able to treat the people in my life with more love. Yeah. But I think it starts with us. There's so much of this externalization of our culture of take the pill, get the surgery, do the thing, blah, 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 quick fix. But sometimes it requires hard work to heal.
Well, there's a reason why we're depressed in the first place, and sometimes it's situational.
True.
With my bout of depression was because of my just terrible bulimia. And that was a situational depression. And you had a situational depression too, that was maybe you wouldn't have got sunk so low if your body had a good foundation.
Right.
And I think we're sort of taught that it's chemical, that it's not there's nothing we can do, just like your grandfather thought that and your family thought that about cancer.
Right.
And we know now that's not true. So what would you say to someone, and then I know you have a podcast about it, so I'd like to hear about that. But what would you say to someone who's feeling blue and feeling, or worse than blue, depressed or suicidal?
Well, first of all, I think that if one is at the point of feeling suicidal, it's important to move past whatever shame one is feeling, because there's so much shame and guilt associated with that feeling. I have felt it, and I know so many people I've talked to about this, of, but I have this great life, and I have people, and it's great. There's a lot of shame around it. And so I think, first of all, not just reaching out to a hotline, because I know that's a lot of people's go-to, but finding someone in your life that you can confide in about how you are feeling is critical. Because the isolation and the shame and the guilt of feeling suicidal or feeling that dark and depressed, if one does not reach out for help and support, that's a very dangerous place to be. It's not a place to be taken lightly. So that's the very first thing. But beyond that, I think it is understanding that this is a complex puzzle with many pieces to figure out. It's looking at our nutrient values and getting a blood panel test. It's getting our neurotransmitters tested. If need be, finding the right kind of psychotherapist or psychologist to work with. It's addressing ourselves from a perspective of movement and exploring meditation and mindfulness. For me and for so many people that I work with and coach and help with this, and I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a licensed therapist, but it has to be looked at from every possible perspective, a mental, a physical, psychological, and spiritual perspective. When someone is experiencing that kind of darkness and depression, one has to look at every aspect of their life, because we don't know which aspect of life needs to be addressed.
And is it also your partner or your work situation? There's all that too that we have to have the courage to look at and see.
And I'm glad you said the word courage, Alexandra, because it does take a radical amount of courage to, first of all, admit that you are that depressed or suicidal or in that dark of a place. But it takes a lot of work to pull yourself out of the well. A lot of work.
To even want to take action.
And I think that's why people would rather pop a pill, because it does take a lot of effort and work to address our health, whether it's cancer, whether it's heart disease, whether it's depression, whatever our thing is. It does take work and it takes effort. And I think that can feel daunting to people.
When you're depressed,
especially when you're depressed or sick.
No energy.
Yeah. You don't feel good about yourself.
I got to pull myself out of this place. What do you, give me the pill. I don't want to pull myself. I just want to feel better. But instead of the Band-Aid solution, I want to encourage people to look at the long game. It's boy, there's so much self-blame and self-pity of like, I got myself here, like beating ourselves up over where we're at. But just because you got yourself there, it's not about beating ourselves up over having cancer, having heart disease, feeling depressed, but it is our responsibility to address it. And I just want to encourage people to explore more holistic, natural possibilities of doing that, because there are solutions. People have address their cancer, their heart disease, their depression through holistic ways. And I just want to encourage people to do that first before they go the pill route or before they go the surgery route, and using that perhaps as a last resort rather than the first option.
Right. And if they've decided to go the pill route, make sure that they dive into exactly what you're talking about. Maybe they need that pill to even be able to get up in the morning.
For sure.
And then dive into what you're saying, but don't not dive into the holistic approach to depression.
Exactly. Yeah. It just, I think as clinical as explore all your options, but truly think about playing the long game, think about the longevity aspect of it. How can I build a sustainable foundation to feel better throughout the rest of my life, however many years I have. And that's what I'm thinking about with my own health and the people that I work with, is how do we create sustainable foundations for living, a long, joyful, balanced life? What does that mean to each of us?
Before we go, tell us about your new podcast.
Yeah.
It's called This Might Get Uncomfortable.
Because if people want more of this, there's a place for you.
Tell us about what do you deal with?
It's a focus on holistic mental health and emotional wellness, and not just from a nutritive perspective, not just from a functional perspective, but how do we have open, authentic, radically vulnerable conversations about what we're struggling with? The feelings of not enoughness, the feelings of not loving ourselves enough, feeling suicidal, feeling depressed, having fractured relationships and trying to mend those things. All of these aspects of what it means to cultivate a healthy mind and a healthy set of emotions in this world. What does that even mean? So it's an exploration of human relationships, of our health, of our wellness, and ultimately what makes us feel not happy, because I'm not aiming for happy. I want to say this, happy to me is happy is an unsustainable emotion, just like sorrow. We're talking about how do we cultivate a sense of inner peace and balance and contentment. Because I'm not shooting for happy. I'm shooting for contentment, which is all is well. I am at peace in my heart and my soul, and I can handle whatever life is throwing at me. So how do we explore the idea of contentment in an often crazy world that is distracting us, making us feel like we're not enough, thinking that we've got to go be chasing things from a material or a fame perspective or getting things? So it's just a deep dive into what does it mean to be a balanced, contented, sane human being in a crazy planet.
Well,
and you hosted alongside your best friend, Whitney.
Whitney, yes.
Okay, so This Might Get Uncomfortable. Download it, people. And where else can people find you?
People can find, well, first of all, the new brand where we launched this podcast is called Wellevator, and it's all about holistic wellness solutions. It's WELLEVATR.com.
Oh, okay.
And my website's jasonwrobel.com, jasonwrobel.com. I've got a great YouTube channel, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, all the things. I just recently joined TikTok because all the kids are doing the TikTok.
That's what I've heard too.
And that's been really cool, though. That's been really an interesting growth platform in many ways to reach a younger demographic. So I just recently got on TikTok, which is really fun.
Good for you. Well, you're a child at heart, so I'm sure that they love you on that platform. Thank you so much, Jason, for being on our show. We really appreciate all that you've shared with us.
Thank you so much for having me, ladies.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mwah, mwah, mwah. Absolutely love you. And you're coming back. Just FYI.
Okay, well, I'll do it.
Okay.
Easy.
All right.
Done.
And look out for the Switch4Good meal plans that Jason's creating. They're going to be out February 1st, and we'll keep you guys posted for sure on the podcast. All right. Cheers.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the Switch for Good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to Switch for Good. This is the future.